Today on Sugar Spun Run, I'll be showing you how to make my favorite coconut cake. Hey everyone, Sam here, and today I am sharing a super soft, moist, delicious recipe for coconut cake. Now, this recipe is based off of my grandmother's really popular coconut cake recipe, but she actually uses a box mix for the cake part, so we're not going to be doing that today. I have a great cake recipe we're going to be using as the base. Like I said, super moist, super soft. I think you're gonna love it. So let's go ahead and begin by making the cake portion. The frosting is all her, so you can give her all the credit for that. Now, the first thing you're going to want to do is preheat your oven to 350 degrees Fahrenheit. Next, you are going to need a large bowl, and to that bowl, we are going to be adding 6 tablespoons of softened, unsalted butter. We'll also be adding 2/3 cup of either canola oil or vegetable oil. Either one of these will work just fine. I found that using a nice blend of butter and oil gives us a very soft, moist, and flavorful cake. Next, we'll be adding 2 cups of granulated sugar. At this point, you'll want to use an electric mixer. A stand mixer would also work. I'm just using my hand mixer today for the cake portion, and you're going to beat your ingredients together until they're nice and creamy and well combined. This is looking pretty good, so now we can add our sour cream. You're going to need 1 cup of sour cream for this recipe. We'll also want to add our flavoring. I'm going to be using 2 teaspoons of vanilla extract, and I also like to use a little bit of coconut extract. This is 1/2 teaspoon of coconut extract. Of course, we'll want to stir our ingredients together again until everything is combined. Now, once you have everything nicely combined in your large bowl, you're going to need a second medium-sized bowl, and you're going to add 2 3/4 cup of all-purpose flour to this bowl. We'll be adding a teaspoon of baking powder, 1/2 teaspoon of baking soda, and 1 teaspoon of salt. And just whisk everything together until it's completely combined. Now we'll want to stir our dry ingredients into our wet ingredients. Now, you do not want to use your electric mixer for this step. You want to do this by hand using a spoon or a spatula, and you want to gently fold the flour mixture into your other ingredients. Now, the reason you don't want to use an electric mixer and you want to be so careful is because if you overmix this batter, you can end up with a cake that's too dry and too dense. We don't want that, so we're just going to be careful and gentle when folding together our wet and dry ingredients. Now, we are almost finished with our cake batter, but there is one more critical ingredient that we're going to be adding, and that is egg whites. You're going to need 6 large egg whites. You're going to want to put these in a clean, completely grease-free bowl, and you want to make sure you don't even have a tiny bit of egg yolk mixed in with these egg whites, or they're not going to whip up properly. So what we're going to be doing is you're going to need an electric mixer, and if you're using the same one, make sure you clean your beaters. They also need to be completely clean, dry, and grease-free. And we're going to beat these egg whites on high speed until stiff peaks form. It will take a couple minutes of beating your egg whites on high speed before they are ready to add to the rest of your batter. You'll know they're ready because they've increased in volume. They're pretty stable. You can see here, if I pick them up with my spatula, they're pretty firm. They're not liquidy at all. And if there are any peaks that form when you lift the beaters straight up out of the mixture, they are going to hold firm. They're not going to fall back in on themselves. They're going to be nice and sturdy. So now this is looking pretty good. So we are going to add this to the rest of our cake batter. Now, as we did before, you're going to not want to use your electric mixer at this point. We'll use our spatula and carefully and gently fold these egg whites into the batter. Now, the batter is going to be a little stiff at first, but resist the urge to just really beat everything together really hard or very quickly. You want to gently fold everything together. Ultimately, your goal is that you should not be able to see any egg white streaks in the batter, because while you want to do this carefully and gently, while you don't want to overmix your batter, it is still important that these egg whites be evenly distributed and well combined through your cake batter. Now you're going to want to evenly divide this cake batter into 2 8-inch cake pans. You could also use 9-inch pans. That would work fine. You will just need to bake them for a little bit less time. Now you'll want to use a parchment paper round in the bottom of the pan. I just cut out a piece of parchment and fit it in the bottom. And you'll want to either grease and flour the sides or spray them with a baking spray. When my mom does this, she actually uses a scale to make sure each cake has exactly the same amount of batter in it. I'm not that technical, but it's not a bad idea, and it would certainly ensure that your cakes bake evenly. Now let's take these over to our 350 Fahrenheit preheated oven, where they will need to bake for about 28 to 30 minutes, or until a toothpick inserted in the center comes out clean or with a few moist crumbs. Let the cakes cool in their pans for about 15 minutes before taking a knife and running that around the ridge of the cake to loosen it from the cake pan, and then inverting it onto a cooling rack to cool completely. And thanks to that parchment paper liner, you should have no problem with your cake sticking to the pan whatsoever. Before we can frost our cakes, you definitely want to let them cool completely. You don't want them to be warm at all, but meanwhile, we can go ahead and start making our frosting. Now, as I said, this is my grandmother's old-fashioned recipe. She also loves using it on red velvet cake, and I highly recommend using a stand mixer to make the frosting. There's a lot of mixing involved. You could do it by hand, but my stand mixer just makes everything a lot easier. Now we're going to start with 1½ sticks or 3/4 cup of salted butter, and you want this to be softened to room temperature. We'll also be adding 9 tablespoons of shortening, and 1½ cups of granulated, not powdered, sugar. Beat these ingredients together until everything is creamy and well combined. You will want to pause periodically to scrape the sides and bottom of the bowl, just to make sure everything gets completely combined. The next ingredient you're going to need is 1/4 cup or 4 tablespoons of all-purpose flour, and this should be sifted. We're going to run our mixer on medium speed, and we're going to add about 1 tablespoon of this flour at a time, running the mixer for 15 seconds between each addition. Once again, you'll want to scrape the sides and bottom of the bowl, and then we'll run the mixer again for about another 30 seconds. Now we will add 3/4 teaspoon of vanilla extract for some flavor. And you will also need 1 cup of milk, or as I like to use, 1 cup of coconut milk. Now my grandmother's old-fashioned recipe uses regular full-fat milk. I like the added flavor of using coconut milk. I mean, this is a coconut cake after all. I'm just going to stir everything together on low speed just until we get that coconut milk mostly combined. And then again, you'll want to pause and scrape down the sides and bottom of the bowl. Now, here is why I really recommend using a stand mixer. This icing is now going to need to beat on medium-high speed for at least 12 minutes or until there is absolutely no grittiness left from the granulated sugar. I'm going to run it for about 6 minutes, pause, scrape down the side of the bowl again, and then run it another 6 minutes and we'll test it then. So for me, I've found that it usually takes about 12 minutes or so for this frosting to lose any of that grittiness from the sugar. You can test that the grittiness is gone by rubbing a little bit between your fingers. You shouldn't feel any sugar granules, but my favorite way to test it is just to taste it. That is perfect. We are ready to frost our cakes. Let me go wash my hands and grab those cakes and we'll get them iced. This is actually my grandmother's cake platter, one of my favorite cake platters to use. And since I'm kind of making one of her recipes, I figured it would be appropriate to use for this coconut cake. Now, you want to use a lot of frosting and get a nice thick layer between your 2 cakes. So I'm going to top this first layer off with a lot of frosting. And it is a very silky frosting. It's supposed to be this texture. That's what makes it so good, gives it a really nice mouthfeel. Kind of reminds me a little bit of my Swiss meringue buttercream. We'll top this off with our second cake layer, and then we'll want to cover the rest of our cake with this frosting. My grandmother's recipe calls for 18 ounces of frozen shredded coconut. You would buy that in your frozen section, you would let it thaw, and you would use that to cover the icing on your coconut cake. Now, I've found that it's very difficult to find frozen shredded coconut anywhere, so if you can't get your hands on it, just using dried shredded coconut that you find in your baking aisle will work just as well. We're just going to use our hands to lightly pat this coconut all over the cake until it's completely covered. And yes, this step is pretty messy. You're going to get coconut all over the place. All right, personally, I love this coconut cake after it's been chilled in the fridge for a bit. Make sure if you chill it, you put it in an airtight container so it doesn't dry out. But I don't have the patience to wait for that right now, so we're gonna go ahead and dig right in. And that is how you make my all-time favorite coconut cake. If you guys try this recipe out, please let me know what you think. I love hearing from you. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. The cake is so soft, the icing is so good. If you are a coconut fan, you are going to love this recipe. Hey, if you enjoyed today's coconut cake recipe video, I would really appreciate it if you would give me a thumbs up and make sure to subscribe. Also, if you enjoyed today's recipe, here are a few others you might like as well.